On this episode of China Unscripted, China is edging Taiwan closer to war. New militias are being set up across China, and billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars are being spent to fix an old problem. Welcome to China. Shelly, look up. We've started. We're already doing it. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelly John.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
It's just us today, so we can start off the rails.
Don't even want to wait till the end. Just start off the rails.
Hey, if somebody had been paying attention, the nice people come to our show, and here you are just looking down.
At my phone?
At your phone.
Yes, at the stories we're about to talk about.
I'm sorry. I respect you more than Shelly. Let me apologize for Shelly. God, so.
Maybe I need to be, go to do a self-criticism session.
No, I'm happy to criticize you all by myself. So, the news this week, well, technically last week, I guess, but hey, there has been a new, in the salami slicing that China is doing to conquer Taiwan, they just cut off a big old piece.
Of salami.
Of a big old slice of salami. There's several incidents that happened. First, there were Chinese fishermen in the areas around Jinmen, which we've been to. That was a wonderful time. It's just off the coast of China. You can see China from this Taiwanese island. And then the Chinese fishermen were in the area, and then there was this big chase with the Taiwanese Coast Guard, and the fisherman boat capsized.
The fisherman boat didn't they were unregistered. They didn't have like a number or name or whatever. They were in Taiwanese waters.
Yeah, you're right. It's fishermen, Chinese fishermen.
Well, I mean, they could have actually.
Let's say they were legitimate fishermen and not necessarily maritime militia, because we don't know. But what we do know is that they were definitely violating Taiwanese maritime rules.
Yes.
Right. And so, what do you normally do? The Coast Guard says, "Hey, you're violating the rules." And they will, take some action, right? Could be punitive, or could just be,
get out of the water,
go cross the median line.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
What, are you paying attention now, Shelly?
No, I was just going to say it's probably not the median line, but anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, whatever the line they call between Jinmen and Xiamen that separates Taiwanese and Chinese waters.
But so anyways, these fishermen, which, in context, China does have this whole maritime militia using fishermen as basically a branch of the military unofficially. So we don't really know if these were fishermen. But they ran. The Taiwanese Coast Guard pursued. At some point, the fishing boat capsized.
Thank you for illustrating that, Chris.
And even though everyone was rescued, I guess two of the Chinese fishermen did die.
Like at the hospital in Taiwan.
Yeah. So obviously, this was this is what China's salami slicing does. It's always these dangerous things that the risk is always somebody might actually die. And this time, somebody actually died.
Yeah. No, it's really sad because, people didn't have to die on this.
Sorry.
Yeah, that part. Yeah. But then, the incident does not end there, unfortunately.
No, well, because there was first of all, a big backlash in Chinese state media about how, the Taiwanese aggression
on these poor, defenseless fishermen.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so then China announced that it would start to do more. Its Coast Guard would start doing more patrols, and they're getting closer and closer to Taiwanese water. And then they actually boarded a Taiwanese tour boat.
I mean, why let a good crisis go to waste?
Who said that?
That's
from something.
It is from something.
Was it a James Bond movie?
I've not.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Actually, watched any James Bond movies.
You've never
to completion.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I have been, in the vicinity when other people were watching James Bond movies.
Been in the vicinity of a James Bond movie.
My dad would watch James Bond movies, and I kind of catch 10 minutes of it here or there.
The ones with Pierce Brosnan.
I don't remember, or the old ones with Sean Connery and I can't remember
Timothy
the other guy.
Dalton
and
Roger Moore.
Yes, Roger Moore. I couldn't remember his name, but I didn't really sit down and watch an entire one. I've never watched a Daniel Craig one. I tried to watch one and I fell asleep halfway through. And I don't think that's not anything about James Bond movies. It's just I was super tired and it was late at night.
How do you feel about this, Matt?
About Shelley never watching James Bond?
I feel like we should rectify that. Yeah, have you?
Yes.
Have you also never seen Star Wars?
Me?
Yeah.
I've seen the original Star Wars as a kid.
Okay.
Because my dad was into it in the 80s. And then I've seen I've never seen any of the first, like,
the episodes 1, 2, 3.
The prequels.
Yeah. I've maybe seen like 10 minutes of the first one. And then I saw the, 7 and 8? But I did not watch the Rise of Skywalker.
Okay, well, there's no need for you to watch the Star Wars prequels, but the James Bond movies, I think we all need to do movie night.
We do. Dune 2 is coming out. Anyways, so yeah, they boarded a Taiwanese tour boat. That was a little too, it was getting a little too off the rails even for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nice people are hearing this nice story about...
Yeah, we're not here to talk about movies.
No, we're not. Yeah, so like this is a major escalation. And now Taiwan is warning these Taiwanese boats that like if Chinese Coast Guard is like, we are boarding you, don't let them board. Because in this case, basically everything was fine. Like the Chinese Coast Guard eventually left, but who knows what might happen.
I'm now picturing like the Chinese Coast Guard takes the Taiwanese tour boat hostage. It's like weird stuff, yeah.
But it's not that weird. It could happen.
Well, the thing is, it's very one-sided, right? Because the PRC claims that, like, basically there's what Taiwanese sovereign territory, right? It doesn't exist from their perspective. So for them, it's no problem to just board a Taiwanese boat
because it's
or
a
to
Chinese
encroach into
boat.
Exactly. But the Taiwanese, meanwhile, are like, well, our status quo, which we adhere to, stipulates that you have this separation. So it's very hard for Taiwan to respond in the same way that the CCP is doing things, because like in a rule of law system, you cannot do that.
It's also Jingmen is like a weird, like in terms of the feelings in Jingmen about mainland China and Taiwan. It's kind of like a weird place because they were bombarded with artillery shells.
China really actually tried to invade.
They tried to invade and failed. What, like twice?
Yeah.
And then after the second time, they just like contented themselves with like, hurling artillery shells. Most of them, which were not explosives, they had like propaganda leaflets on the inside of the shells for, what was it, 20-some years?
A good long while.
At Jingmen. So, imagine living in this place where like you're getting shelled like 3 times a week, but then like to the point where they had these underground bunkers and you could actually walk underground right between houses because they had these places to take cover when you were being shelled. But at the same time, when the CCP started to do this like whole soft takeover of Taiwan thing and they wanted to use economic stuff to bring Taiwan closer to the mainland, they really worked hard on Jingmen, right? Like when we were there, remember there was that one street that had just like a bunch of like
PRC flags.
PRC flags.
Yeah.
And so, because Jingmen historically, it doesn't have the Taiwanese identity as strongly as Taiwan, the island, does.
Mm-hmm.
So then you had this kind of like people being like, oh, well, it's good to be economically closer to mainland China. And so it's like a weird kind of mix of feelings there.
Yeah, but it is under the authority of the Taiwanese government.
Yeah, but if there was anywhere that the CCP could take over, that's part of Taiwan.
Yeah, and would, the other countries come to Taiwan's defense if all the CCP did was to say, oh, we're just taking, they take Jingmen. Oh, we're done. That's it. We're just taking Jingmen, kind of like a Crimea situation, right? Where like there's strong words of condemnation when Russia took over Crimea in 2014, but then nobody did anything. But then later, there's like a much bigger invasion.
I think it would depend. Like if Taiwan was like, nope, we are fighting a war, and then there would be a war.
Right.
And then it couldn't be treated as just like, oh, well, maybe they'll stop there.
Right.
Kind of thing.
So anyway, well, we're seeing what could be potentially the beginnings of such a war.
Yeah. Well, because also what happened recently is it's not just this encroachment on the seas by civilian Chinese fishing boats. Uh, s- Chinese civilian aviation is now also crossing closer to Taiwan. So you mentioned earlier the median line, which is sort of like this unofficial line demarcating the middle point between mainland China and Taiwan.
Now we're talking about the Taiwanese Strait and like the main island of
Yeah,
Taiwan.
the main island. So, I mean, it was always kind of official, but now it's really unofficial because unilaterally the Chinese side decided that they will have their flights like closer to that median line than what both sides had previously agreed upon. And so the Taiwanese side, like the Taiwanese Air Force, is concerned that like a Chinese military plane could like hide under a civilian plane.
Like a commercial jet.
Yeah, like a commercial jet, yeah. It could always be that like that commercial jet itself is actually secretly a military operation because planes travel pretty fast. If you're just like a little bit closer, that can make a huge difference in terms of like Taiwan's ability to react to.
So you're saying that they're air salami slicing?
They are air salami slicing by land, by sea, by mail.
Right. It's also like unnecessary from an aviation perspective to do this. Like I think for clarity, what's happening is that between a few different Chinese cities, the flights don't go in a direct straight line. They actually fly out to sea a little bit, and then they fly either southwest or northeast, and then they fly back inland to their destination. And so there are reasons for doing it that way because they're not over land the whole time, but there's no reason for them to fly that close to the median line. It doesn't, it doesn't save fuel. It's not safer. It actually creates more problems potentially.
Well, especially because of the war aspect.
Right. So the thing is that it's essentially there's no excuse for it. That's not clearly like there's a strategic or possibly military reason.
I mean, it's almost like the CCP is playing "I'm not touching you," like
Oh yeah, when you like circle your, or no, that's a different.
No,
that's I'm not hitting you.
Okay.
Wait, no, that's a different game.
Matt is very far away from his childhood.
That's actually sadly true.
It's the don't touch me. Oh, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
Oh, right.
You.
Yeah.
Shelley is still a child.
I'm still a child at heart. Yes.
Yes. Meanwhile, I was fighting my older brother with the windmill arms.
Yeah.
Was he also holding you back? Is
that
like
by my forehead? Then I learned Taekwondo and I adjusted my style. And then I was asked to leave the dojo due to discipline problems. But that's a whole other story.
It was almost a Karate Kid movie until that part of it.
The Karate Kid was the bad guy.
They're making a new Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan.
Wow, those two worlds have fused.
Yeah, like the Jackie Chan Karate Kid that nobody really watched.
The one with like Jaden Smith?
Yeah, Will Smith's kid.
Yeah, it's Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan and like I guess a new young kid who's going to be the...
That's great. They can finally decide who has the best karate, Macchio or Jackie Chan. Stupid. Everything's... Hey, speaking of stupid, China is lacing waters with cyanide near the Philippines. Yeah. See, I got us back on the rails.
I mean, as you do, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's a type of fishing that used to be used like maybe half a century ago, which is like cyanide fishing, where basically you dump a bunch of cyanide into the water where the fish are because it stuns or kills the fish, and then you can just collect them.
Of course, there would be no problems with poisoning the ocean, right?
Yeah, like people in the 60s just had a different idea of environmental concerns. In other words, they did not have them. And so like this is a horrible, destructive way to fish, especially when they're doing it at the Scarborough Shoal, which, because you're damaging not only the marine life, you're also damaging the coral reef. I mean, that stuff's alive. Like the fact that all these Filipino fishermen, go out there to do their fishing, because that's like one of the best spots near the Philippines. And basically now it's not just like when we were there in 2016, we saw like a whole bunch of Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia boats kind of guarding the area, right?
I'm glad that when we went into the waters and planted the China Uncensored flag on the Scarborough Shoal, which means I own it, I'm glad there's no cyanide in the water.
So what do you have to say about China putting cyanide in your territorial waters?
You're right. This is my what the. I do not approve of this one lick. No, sir. I'm going to start putting cyanide. No, I don't like where this is going. I'll write a stern rebuke to the UN.
So it's kind of like they're just now poisoning everything. Like it's literally like a physical manifestation of the metaphor for the CCP poisons everything.
Yeah, it's like that childhood game. I'm poisoning your water. I'm poisoning your water.
It is kind of like, well, if I can't have the cookie, no one's going to eat the cookie. It is kind of like because the Philippines has been pushing back on a lot of the CCP's slicing territorial claims, things like that. Like when they cut the cable underwater that they tried to put up a net in the Scarborough Shoal, all that stuff. So now they're like, all right, we're just going to poison water.
It's a salting the earth strategy, but since you can't salt the sea,
you can cyanide the sea. The Philippine government, I want to say, has been brilliant over the last year or so. And one of their key strategies is to literally just show the truth of what the CCP is doing instead of covering it up, like often happens, or like say the U.S. government covering up, spy balloons until that one that they couldn't cover up.
But like, they tried to.
They tried.
Or every U.S. company covering up the fact that they've been hacked by China.
Right, because from that perspective, it's embarrassment. But from a national standpoint, it's not just embarrassment, but it also potentially harms relations to expose what the CCP is doing. I think that mentality is stupid, by the way. But the Philippines government is smart because they're now taking video. They're putting cameras on their Coast Guard ships. They're releasing this footage to the public. So all you have to do is look and see what's actually happening. And the fact that people now have greater access to the truth, like people are shocked, right? As they should be, and as they should have been for, a decade or two, but at least it's happening now. So I would say I applaud that. And I applaud them exposing the cyanide thing and the net cutting thing.
Yeah, it's a good strategy. I wonder if there's more like Taiwan can do along those lines.
Right. Yeah. The more you just show what the CCP is doing, like, because they don't have a defense for a lot of these things, like flying spy balloons over Taiwan, right? They need to. What should happen is people are taking videos of these things and releasing them to the media, but I haven't really seen this happening.
Yeah, Matt, I think that's a really good point. Another topic I know we wanted to talk about is this was actually something we covered a couple of months ago when it was just kind of being talked about, but now it's actually happened, is that Chinese companies are going back to the Mao Zedong era, and they now have their own militias. Personally, I don't see this as a Mao Zedong thing. I think they're just all video game nerds and are, celebrating the upcoming release of the Final Fantasy VII remake, which obviously has the Shinra Corporation that has its own military soldier.
Yeah, Shelley knows that, obviously.
I've never played Final Fantasy.
Hey, next stream.
There's a lot of dystopian future video games or movies or TV shows where, the world or cities are controlled by essentially giant corporations with private armies. And that is kind of what we're seeing happening in China. But the key difference is that these militias are not just controlled by those corporations. They're mostly state-owned corporations, right? But they're also controlled by the Communist Party. It's kind of this dual control.
Yeah, it still backs the state ultimately instead of just like power to these individual companies.
Right. So if the Communist Party gives instructions, they have to follow them. And some people are like concerned that this is basically building up China's army against foreign adversaries. But
really,
that's probably not what's really going on.
I mean, it just seems like, would you build up the actual army instead of corporate militias?
Exactly. So what's the point of corporate militias?
I don't know. I mean, if we were really going to go back to the Mao era, then they would all kind of fight each other to see which one was the most loyal to Xi Jinping, right?
I
Like
like
the
this
Red
idea.
Guards, yeah.
That could actually happen.
Yeah, but I mean, what's probably happening is that they're concerned about social unrest. And, when people protest, a lot of times the protests start over economic reasons. So
like all the local governments that can't pay civil workers currently.
So it's like, oh, like I just spent 2 years building this bridge and like, I'm owed like 12 months back pay and where's my money? And the government doesn't have it. But what they do have is a militia. Or so like, with a private construction company or whatever would have something that they could send in. It's more efficient than having to go to Beijing and be like, hey, would you mind sending tanks like 2,000 miles down to Henan and do this? Because remember, there was like those big bank protests there a couple of years ago.
Or I was just thinking even of like when, was it Evergrande? This is
the parking lot thing?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it was the parking lot thing, but basically people were protesting. Like workers were protesting that they weren't getting their, like.
I remember something like that happening with Evergrande, and this is well before like the big.
Yeah, this is before like it actually started to collapse.
Right.
But if you have your workers like revolting inside your company, you send in your militia.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like this is a good, really fundamental solution to solve the underlying issues.
I mean, of course, we'll have to see how it's implemented because it could just mean that like people have to, get up early and do weird drills or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, like if they make
like it could
actual
just be the
workers do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Volunteer to be part of the militia.
Good. Then you're training workers who could be discontent to do military drills and use weapons.
I mean, otherwise, what are you going to do? Maybe the people who are unemployed because they used to be the, not the security workers, the COVID workers, the dabai, right? Like now,
that's an interesting idea.
People who need jobs.
A lot of those people were migrants too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you say migrants, you're talking about internal migrants.
Yeah, migrants in the sense of China, where like people go from like the rural provinces to some of the bigger provinces to try and make some money.
Yeah, and I think the reason that they really are like migrants is that because of the hukou system, you're either registered as country folk or as city folk. And
technical term.
Yes. And if the country folk want to go to the city, in some cases they can like live there temporarily and work in factories and stuff, but they don't actually have a household registration for the city. So like if they have kids there, the kids can't go to public school. They're not like official citizens of that city, of that urban area.
You can't get healthcare, like certain services. So
so you basically are like it's almost like being an illegal immigrant in your own country, right? And so that system, I mean, it was designed to keep, all these poor country folk from overrunning the cities. But
ironic, huh?
Yes. What do you mean?
Because that was Mao's whole thing. Use the periphery to surround the center. Go to the countryside. Get people to rise up and take out the center.
Right.
It's almost like he's like, that could be used against me.
Well, I mean, then that's when he started sending people from the city into the countryside.
Yes.
Yes, that worked well. And your parents were super happy when it happened to them, right?
Yeah, I mean, although they didn't live in large cities, but they did both go down to the country. Oh, actually, they called it. It was like up to the mountains, down to the country, or something like that. And yep.
Yeah. So anyway, all the techniques and the things the CCP had said when they were rising to power, now they prevent anyone else from doing that.
But I do think it is interesting that we are seeing more and more like this return to Mao's era in many ways. I mean, there's been lots of comparisons between Xi Jinping and Mao for many years.
I think it's actually more tactical and less fundamental than a lot of analysts think. So a lot of people say, oh, Xi Jinping is like, the worst dictator since Mao. And that misses the point that you had horrible, horrible things under Deng Xiaoping, like the Tiananmen massacre, under Jiang Zemin, like the killing of probably millions of Falun Gong practitioners, Hu Jintao and his whole destruction of Tibet, and he started the Uyghur stuff. So like there's been bad stuff happening this entire time, even during the period of economic reform, right? And so what we're seeing now is just that I think the economic reforms were, in a certain political sense, too much. So Xi Jinping's sort of tactic is to say, all right, well, now let's go back to this type of control. But the CCP was always trying to keep things under control. It's just that now they need to do it more because of other problems that have arisen.
I mean, I kind of agree. I think what's happening is that essentially this is fundamentally a Marxist-Leninist system, right?
Right.
So, like, they never gave that up, even during the economic reforms. So, like, what do you have?
I mean, state-owned companies that are run by, like, the sons and daughters of party elites.
Yeah, I mean, all that really the economic, like, opening up did was essentially, like, keep the party from bankrupting the country, because there's, like, suddenly this influx of foreign capital, and then they, along with a lot of corruption, so now the party leaders and their families got wealthy.
Yeah.
Right? So, but, like, fundamentally, the system didn't change. So
Right.
what kind of tools do you have to maintain power? It is still, like, those Marxist-Leninist tools.
Right.
It's just more overt now. I mean,
Right.
people never stopped having to learn communist indoctrination in schools. Like, these things didn't stop, but, like, it was just kind of like no one was really paying attention from the outside, because it was like, well, like, nobody takes it seriously anymore. I mean, how many times have you heard, oh, well, like, okay, nobody believes in communism.
Right.
in
Even
China
though they're
anymore.
forced to study it in school, sometimes at work, in the military.
Right.
Yeah, and
time.
then, and like, it's just this, like, in the West, this kind of like refusal to kind of engage with that, because it's like, oh, well, like, the Cold War's over,
It's the end of history. We're all the same. We
the
just wanna make
Soviet
money.
Union's defeated, like, you know, it's not, nobody's communist anymore, and yeah.
Right. So now that one of the things that's made it more obvious in the last 10 years, especially 5 years, is social media, which is that, say, like in, I don't know, the early 2000s, when the Communist Party started, like, arresting all these Falun Gong people who were going to Beijing. And there was hardly any video or photos of the brutality that was enacted on people. No one was posting to social media like, oh, you know, this is happening to me and my family right now, like, please help, in a live video or something. None of that, because it just wasn't, the technology wasn't there. And then once we get onto, like, the COVID era, for example, everybody has smartphones. Everyone's taking video of, like, how they're being locked down, how they're being,
People breaking
oppressed.
down their doors.
Yeah, just like, and so the world is just so much more aware of this now. And I think that's also why, well, on one hand, it's good, right? Because we're all more aware. But on the other hand, the Communist Party now sees this as a bigger threat. So they have to switch tactics and crack down harder on all sorts of things and control all sorts of things to a greater degree.
I mean, it also, that same technology allows the CCP to track down, for example, those people who participated in the white paper protests against COVID, right? Like,
Right.
they could pinpoint if your cell phone was in an area where the protests were happening.
You
and
don't
then
need
go,
the tanks. You can
Yeah,
just
you
go arrest them after the fact.
Yeah, go arrest them 2 weeks later.
And that's what they did.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a great point. Like, it shows that the Chinese Communist Party is basically like a James Bond movie.
In what sense?
Well, since you know James Bond so well.
So I know what you're saying. Like, even though it's gone from Sean Connery to Roger Moore to Pierce Brosnan to Daniel Craig, it's the same
new face,
character.
same thing.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah.
I see. Well, I'm
Same
actually,
page.
I'm impressed by that, yes.
Yeah.
So,
That analogy, or that Matt and I were on the same page?
No, the analogy, I guess.
Yeah.
So at any rate, well, I think one of the things that's kind of tied to all this mass surveillance is what's now starting to happen in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government has basically announced that they're planning on installing an additional 2,000 security cameras across Hong Kong by the end of this year. Probably a lot more planned after that. And these are also going to use facial recognition. So increasingly, Hong Kong will become part of this surveillance state.
Remember the last protest we went to in Hong Kong in the fall of 2019 was like the anti-mask law protest because people were wearing facial masks when they were protesting to protect their identities, and then the Hong Kong government was making it illegal to wear facial masks in the fall of 2019.
A few months later.
Yeah.
But you know,
but due to AI and other better technology, masks are no longer sufficient to protect your identity from facial
I
recognition.
know they can do like gait recognition.
Yeah,
like,
but
by
even
way
just
you
with the
walk.
eyes, like
Yeah.
remember during COVID, if you had like Face ID on your iPhone, like it could still unlock it if you're wearing a mask.
Could it? I feel like that's
I'd
a
never
new.
Not at
used
the
that
beginning, but
technology.
later. Yeah.
I don't use that technology, so I don't know.
You only type in your passcode, which is 1, 2, 3,
No,
4,
Matt, not on
5,
the air.
6. So of course the Hong Kong police commissioner said citizens do not need to worry about this because it's only going to be used to fight crime.
Oh, good. Oh,
Yeah.
I was worried there. Like you had me going this whole time. Like, oh gosh, there goes Hong Kong again.
No,
Nope,
it's only going to be used to fight crime.
But
Good.
you know, the definition of crime is about to become a lot more extensive with the passage of Article 23,
Oh yeah.
where things that are crimes in the mainland will also be crimes now in Hong Kong.
But people aren't really worried about Article 23. Like remember back 20 years ago, and there were these huge protests
Like
over Article 23. Yeah, half a million people took to the street, and now they're going to pass it again, and nobody's protesting. So obviously that means that people are okay with it.
Definitely. And anyone who does protest, they have those nice facial recognition cameras.
They don't even need to send in tanks. They just go to your apartment 2 weeks later.
Pour cyanide in your water.
Oh.
We'll now return after these brief messages.
A word from our sponsor. Are you tired of plain old water? Why not spice things up with a little cyanide?
Now I'm
China Unscripted, sponsored by cyanide.
Now I'm thinking of that Agatha Christie novel, Sparkling Cyanide.
You read books.
This is like us talking to you about James Bond.
Yeah.
It's like Agatha Christie.
Yes. I have
Books.
I have also never read the James Bond books though. So.
I mean, I know
they
who
were
she
books.
is. I know who she is. She wrote that whole murder on the train thingy.
No, it was Young Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein, the novelization. I love the part where they start singing "Putting on the Ritz."
She was ahead of her time.
Well, if you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
Where is that, Matt?
Putting on the Ritz.
Oh, those crackers, right?
Yes.
God.
Yes. But hey, at least in China, they're now going to have a lot more McDonald's, right?
Yeah, so they currently have about 5,000 McDonald's. And McDonald's' plan is to basically double down by the end of, I think, 2028.
I went to McDonald's right before this podcast and got a double Big Mac, so it has 4 patties instead of 2. Clearly, it's a sign of this doubling down.
I thought the double down was a KFC thing.
Yeah, I had the double down once. It was like a fried chicken sandwich where the instead of buns, it was fried chicken. I forget what was in the middle, probably more meat.
I think it was like cheese and bacon or something.
I almost vomited in the KFC.
Not a good idea.
No, but I usually don't not finish my food, but I had a bite and I was like, oh, I actually really need to throw up right now. And I held it in because I was in Penn Station and in the little KFC there, and it was just I can't do this now. But it was bad. I never went back
feel like
there.
this is an exaggeration. I need to try a double down.
It could just be, well, I mean,
I don't
first
think
of
they
all,
still have it.
smart because you do not want to have to go to a bathroom in Penn Station.
I know. That was going through my mind in this brief moment where I was considering vomiting. Do I do it all over the floor? Do I try to run to a restroom? But sometimes you just have to have the fortitude to hold it in and just vomit a little in your mouth and then swallow it back down.
And then you double down and finish your sandwich.
I did not actually. I threw it in the trash.
I want to hear from everyone watching who's had a double down. Let me know what you thought. This story seems suspicious to me.
Yeah, I think you know what it was for me because I like KFC. I like the fried chicken.
I know you like meat too.
I do. I like meat. And I also separately like cheese, but sometimes a cheeseburger works for me. But something about the fried chicken with the really low quality cheese, it's just that I think is what did it to me.
That kind of reminds me of how Asia in the last 20 to 30 years really started discovering cheese. but sometimes doing it in really weird and off-putting ways.
Didn't we have some weird things in Hong Kong?
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure there was that like breakfast macaroni soup, and you could get cheese on it.
Yeah, I feel like
at McDonald's.
At a McDonald's, it was like a bowl of hot water with macaroni noodles
and sausage that had been like boiled in the
and
soup.
like a slice of cheese.
Yeah,
You could put. I don't think it necessarily had, but there was definitely sausage.
I remember because Alan suggested it, or Alan, our cameraman, and then like Shelley and I were very keen to make you eat that
on camera.
On camera, and you were a trooper, and you ate, I think, a little bit of it.
This is 2014, younger and more innocent time.
Back when the most dangerous thing for us in Hong Kong was the McDonald's macaroni soup for breakfast.
No, there were some still pretty violent protests that were going on. Remember Mongkok?
Oh, I mean, but come on.
Compared to
5 years. No, I was going to say compared to 5 years later, the Mongkok situation, which seemed very tense and dangerous at the time, was like nothing. Those police officers had like riot shields, but no other gear. They didn't even have full riot shields. Like it wasn't. Nobody got tear gassed. Like honestly, like compared to 5 years later, it was. You look back and you're like, oh my gosh, that was.
Things changed so much in 5 years, and now it's been nearly 5 years since those 2019 protests. Even though it's hard to believe that much time has passed.
It's because of the COVID black hole,
right? And so I would like to say I haven't aged 5 years in those 5 years, but my heart has.
That's why you don't remember the "I'm not touching you."
That's right. Yeah. That happened lifetimes ago.
Yes. Yeah, it's weird that like so many foreign companies are like now terrified of China and trying to get out. It's like very recognized now that the China market is not good.
And McDonald's
is doubling down. What, how many are they opening? 10,000?
I think we should just take bets on what,
They want to reach 10,000.
When we when the war with China starts and the CCP nationalizes McDonald's, what they're going to name McDonald's, like how Russia did.
Yeah, they forced McDonald's essentially to sell to some Russian company that renamed them all, but kept like they swapped out the logos, but they kept like the same restaurants. So it looks like a McDonald's and probably similar menus.
Oh, they're going to steal McDonald's IP. They're going to have the secret sauce.
Is that the Big Mac sauce? What is the McDonald's secret sauce?
Nobody knows. That's why it's a secret, Shelley.
I believe it was revealed in The Simpsons, where it's like, oh, sir, do you want me to leave this mayonnaise out in the sun?
But you still remember Simpsons episodes from the 90s.
I do, but because Simpsons episodes stopped being good after the 90s. So my memories of The Simpsons are all the fond ones for when I watched.
Was it last year that you and I watched that episode of The Simpsons because it was something that came up where like it was censored in Hong Kong because they made some kind of Chinese forced labor
joke? Yeah, there was the one about the pedalon bikes.
It was awful.
It was so bad. I was so I almost died of cringe watching that.
Yeah, it was really, really embarrassing. Actually, I was like, this is really terrible.
And yet good shows get canceled. Like
they need to keep the Simpsons
like Rings
on.
of Power.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. So good, Galadriel.
I didn't watch that either.
She's a girl boss.
So we're talking about Hong Kong, right?
No, we're talking about McDonald's in China.
McDonald's, right.
And then that did lead to McDonald's in Hong Kong.
I miss the taro pie, personally.
Oh, fond memories of McDonald's taro pie in Asia.
I mean, it could just be the sleep deprivation talking that we thought it was so good after being up all night
in the tents and stuff, yeah.
I would just like to point out I had McDonald's before this podcast. That's my excuse. I don't know what your excuse is.
Like you literally ate that for lunch before coming here.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I did.
What our excuse for what is?
This despicable off the rails.
You know what? I had a protein shake, and my mind is not as in good shape as your mind. So what I really should have done is just had McDonald's.
It's a perfect combination of all the macronutrients one needs to build a human. So I'll share it on the podcast. I was telling Shelley this earlier. It's brilliant. Like some people talk about how a hot dog is a sandwich, right? We're already off the rails. This will be over quick, I swear. Skip ahead 5 minutes.
Right, a hot dog is a sandwich because it's got meat in between bread.
Yeah. Somebody came up with a cube model for identifying what things are. So like imagine you have a cube and a sandwich, you highlight the top layer, you highlight the bottom layer, that's a sandwich. The bread, you're highlighting where the bread goes. If it's like the side, and underneath, that's a taco, right? It's a taco.
So a hot dog is a taco.
Exactly, a hot dog is a taco. Indisputable. And if you highlight 3 layers, that's a cake, right? Cakes have those layers.
Right.
A Big Mac is a cake.
Wow, so you actually just ate a cake before coming here.
I ate a cake and French fries.
What are the 3? Because the Big Mac has another piece
layer,
of
yeah.
bread.
What if it's got bread all the way around?
But like the 3 layers if that's not cake, it's icing. Is that what you mean?
No. Like you have like a layer of cake, and then there's another layer of cake, and then there might be icing in between. Which in the Big Mac,
I don't know
cake,
what kind of fancy cakes you're having that have triple layers.
You don't eat triple layered cakes, Shelley.
I feel like
I only eat triple layered cakes, Shelley.
Are double layered. Okay, this is
don't come to my next birthday party unless you're bringing a triple layered cake.
Yeah, I don't know if you want.
I'll bring you a Big Mac. Happy birthday.
I mean, I like eating at McDonald's, but I'm deeply disappointed in them for being so stupid on China.
I mean, although McDonald's is franchises, right? So.
Yeah. Yes, but that.
Oh, but maybe it's not franchises everywhere. Actually,
well, I don't know if it's franchises in China, but they're basically making a corporate push for this because otherwise you can't say like, oh, our goal is to open another 5,000 restaurants by 2028, and like somehow that's just like, oh, independent franchise owners are deciding to do this, and we just kind of vaguely hope it happens.
There's still a lot of corporate oversight.
Right. I mean, part of McDonald's business model is real estate because you buy the land, and the land they hope goes up in value. Right?
I don't think that's how it happens in China.
Probably not. Well, also the whole real estate thing in China is a disaster. So that's another issue as well. But yeah,
like the consumer price index is like really volatile in China right now. Like, are people in China really going to be craving a Big Mac? What are they going to call a Big Mac in China? Royal Mao with cheese?
Nice Pulp Fiction reference.
I was wondering where you're going to go with that, but okay, sure.
Yeah, well, so consumer spending is really down. And like, China state-run media was bragging about how like, oh, there's so much travel during the Spring Festival. But like, if you actually look at the numbers of the like sales that are happening during this 2-week period, they're actually way down compared to, previous years.
I'm sure they can say there's so much travel because, I mean, it was on lockdown for so long. So if you compare it to like 2 years ago.
Look how much people are traveling compared to the height of COVID when we did not let them.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's less internal demand in China. There's also less external demand because people. I saw something from Reuters the other day that the U.S. might replace China as Germany's top trading partner, and I think about what a sea change that would be. Like the CCP has used its economic leverage over Germany, especially under Angela Merkel, to control so much of the EU agenda. Because the EU was basically Germany.
I mean, I don't think that Germany's really turned the ship around in that sense yet.
Nope, they're still floating on that cyanide water.
Mm.
Yeah, so, you have less demand for Chinese exports. And that means that there's less output from those Chinese factories, which means there's less jobs. And with less jobs, consumers have less money, so they're spending less, which means internal consumption of products also goes down, which is just a downward spiral for that whole economy.
Or the Communist Party steps in, and in order to prevent, decreased output, they artificially lower prices of Chinese goods so the factories can keep producing the same amount. But then they're essentially dumping Chinese projects internationally.
I mean,
then countries, complain and put more sanctions and probes
but also
and
it's
tariffs.
not economically viable long term because, like, where is the CCP going to get the money to do all those subsidies? Well, they can do taxation, but they can only get so much if the economy's weak.
Well, in the past, they used to do it by foreign investment.
Right.
But that's dried up.
Right. And they could try printing money, but the problem with that is if you print too much money and you get inflation, that weakens the value of your currency. Then that basically screws up your your trade, and it screws up your imports. So there's a whole like knock-on effects of everything that they're trying or could potentially try to do.
What's going through my head right now is that like the CCP is hoping that Temu will save the Chinese economy.
Not Shein?
Well,
So,
I mean,
you know
you want to shop like a billionaire, Chris.
It's actually pronounced Temu, Shelley.
As all the Super Bowl ads tried to tell us. Yeah, okay. Well, however it's pronounced, it is insane the amount of marketing and advertising that's going into.
And the prices are they're so low, they're either subsidized by the Chinese state or the labor on creating those products is free. And that's always a good sign when people in China are making things without getting paid.
Yeah, I understand that completely not buying anything made in China is very challenging for a lot of people. But you don't have to use Temu or Temu, whatever. And I still know people who use it. And it's like, this is a weapon created by the Chinese Communist Party.
But Chris, have you seen what you can get for $2.99? Yeah, it is.
You can get a brand new dress for just $2.99, Chris.
Or like I feel like Temu ads are often weird things to kind of catch your attention.
Yeah.
You'll be on a website and it'll be like 3 random looking things. And there's nothing to tell you what this ad is for. But it's
communism destroys all meaning.
It's a Temu ad.
But also some of the products advertised haven't been manufactured. So they only make them if someone orders it.
That seems efficient.
It's like just a weird thing because it allows them to have more products and then see where the demand is.
Well, Matt, when I order a Big Mac, I expect that Big Mac has not already been created. It's made fresh and
hot.
Each
time at McDonald's.
Each time.
Fresh and hot in the microwave. It is. They microwave it right there in the restaurant. Yeah. So don't shop on Temu.
Don't eat McDonald's before a podcast.
Or do, actually, I think, because look how sharp your brain is today.
So we're going to talk about the cranes?
Oh, yeah, let's talk about the cranes.
Oh, that's a good idea. My gosh, I'm really trying to make a Ukraine pun.
Oh.
It's not coming out.
I was actually thinking about origami cranes.
Oh, okay.
So, but we both went in different but wrong directions.
That's right.
Shelley, get us back on the rails.
So I think we've talked before on the podcast about how at U.S. ports, there are a lot of the cranes that actually move the giant shipping containers are, manufactured in China, and there's a security risk that comes along with it. So now the Biden administration is deciding that they will spend, what is it, $40 billion?
I think it's $20 billion from the $1 trillion infrastructure bill
to replace these Chinese-made cranes with non-Chinese made cranes. In fact, with cranes made in the U.S. for the first time in 30 plus years.
Yeah. Wouldn't it have been cheaper to just always use U.S.?
Yeah, I was going to say, now we have to spend billions of dollars ripping out the cranes and putting in new cranes because especially some of these ports are near military facilities.
Yeah.
So there is not just the concern that, let's say we get into some kind of war with China, or even not a full war, just like a trade war or something, and then the trains stop working, right? Or
because it's the Chinese software that controls the Chinese crane hardware.
So to stall, as a kind of like a hostage negotiation.
Right. They basically disrupt shipping, and they stop all shipping for a week. And 80% of U.S. Shipping cranes, the ship to shore cranes, 80% are made by Chinese companies. It's mainly just one big state.
And we already saw the effect this can have during COVID when there would be huge backlogs in ports, but the train system wasn't working. It was a disaster. And that's when everyone was working together to try and fix things as quickly as possible.
There's another surveillance, another security issue, which is that, and this is right now, because the software for these, to make the unloading and loading more efficient, like it has these systems for tracking what's in the cargo container, what's the origin, what's the destination, right? And so basically, if all this information is going to Beijing, which it might currently go to Beijing, or it might be triggered to do that in the future, I don't know. But then basically, even if we stop trading with China, they can monitor where all the supplies are going. And if they see us sending certain types of supplies that could be weapons or could just be military adjacent things, or even food, packages and stuff to Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, then they know that something's coming, right? And so it's also allowing them to track really key strategic economic movements.
And like I was mentioning, the military installations, like military sometimes uses the same ports.
Yeah.
As these civilian ports. So now then you have like that extra layer of like, could these cranes be able to have surveillance capabilities over what, like military logistics?
It was such a bad idea giving Chinese companies access to critical U.S. infrastructure.
But Chris, it was so cheap. They were just offering
it's
a great deal.
Hey, come on, who cares?
There's not going to be a much heavier price later down the line.
No.
What kind of upsets me about this? Like, first, I do actually think the Biden administration is doing the right thing here by trying to stop ports from using Chinese cranes. Like, it's absolutely the right move, even though it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars. But the thing is that if there had been a law passed 20 years ago that prevented this, then the corporations would have just bought cranes made in the US or like allied countries. And then not only would they not have to be so wasteful with this, but it wouldn't cost US taxpayers enormous amounts of money.
If only Biden had been in politics back then, 20 years ago.
I mean, a few years ago, I was looking up something to do with China and the WTO and the, most favored nation status, trade status, like permanent most favored nation that the Congress, including the Senate, voted on. And I found like in the congressional record some speech. It was a bunch of speeches made by different senators like debating this issue, because before China, like trading status had to be voted on each year by Congress, and it was tied to their human rights record. And then the permanent most favored nation trading status thing that happened in like either 99 or 2000. The idea is that now they're going to be permanent. It's not tied to the human rights thing anymore. We don't have to vote on this every year. And Joe Biden had made a speech in favor of making it permanent and kind of brought up the human rights thing as like oh, well, this is just like a straw man argument that, we shouldn't have to, like, we should keep, caring about human rights regardless of what happens with the trade situation.
Like, not only is that a stupid idea, but also like right at that time, which is like mid 1999, there was like this huge crackdown on Falun Gong, right? And so like the timing of that should have been obvious. And
no, I mean, like, that's, right when we needed China to join the WTO and become part of like the prosperous, international like family of countries that totally follows international law and will never.
The anarchists and leftists who opposed China's entry into the WTO were right.
I remember there were big protests in, was it Seattle?
Yeah, they were all like, like progressive or left-leaning, like workers' rights, essentially. They didn't want to, like, they knew this would hurt U.S. workers, or that was what they believed. And, the U.S. government was like, oh, no, it's no big deal. It's going to be cheaper prices for consumers. And all the socialists were like, no, this is really bad for workers. And they were right.
Wow, things have really changed in
really
20
have.
years.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, but Biden wasn't saying anything that, half the senators weren't saying, right?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think Biden is like many politicians, his policies are aligned with the political climate at the time, rather than being right. Like someone like Bernie Sanders is like, he's got the same, like he's been on the same anti-bank train for like 40 years. Like he's never changed it, right? It's the same guy. Whereas Biden and many politicians who've been in office, like the political winds shift and they shift along with them. Things in the party, go from from left to right or right to left or whatever, and the politicians just move with them. And I think Biden is largely one of those. So, look at him in terms of he's been a lot tougher on China than the Obama administration was.
And when he was vice president.
When he was vice president.
Yeah.
But, and I applaud that. But also it's a function to a large degree, I think, of the times, which is that things just shifted under Trump because Trump did change the direction. And then Biden is riding on that because it was clear that at least some of Trump's policies were definitely the right move.
Yeah, Biden's kept Trump's EV tariffs on Chinese. That's the reason we don't have
vehicles.
a bunch of Chinese electric vehicles in America.
Thank
That are
goodness for
currently
that.
flooding Europe, for example. I mean, I think also, towards the tail end of the Obama administration, like let's say in the last 2 years, it's like they realized that they were actually getting screwed.
The pivot to Asia thing?
The pivot to Asia thing. But not just that, like the investigations of like ZTE, like and Huawei, like the ZTE thing definitely started under Obama, right?
Yeah.
So like there was already kind of this change going on, but like the Trump administration definitely saw it as a huge risk. And you have to give the Trump administration and I guess the end of the Obama administration credit for stopping that 5G technology in the U.S. because we're ripping out a bunch of cranes now for $20 billion. Imagine how costly it would be to rip out like all the 5G infrastructure that had been built in the last.
If this show was relying on Huawei, to get onto the internet,
yes.
What show?
Yeah. So I mean, imagine having to rip out all of that stuff because it was made in China.
Yeah.
And yet we are still. There are a lot of countries that are still installing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, very much.
But it's cheaper, Shelley. It saves money, and isn't that what really counts?
Well, I mean, I got to give the Biden administration credit for. Have you heard how they're gonna fund this crane replacement thing?
Is it the Infrastructure Act that was already passed?
No. It's like it's a different model where like individual civilians can operate the cranes.
And you know what they call that program?
Don't steal it, Matt, you ass. I had it all set up. Why'd you have to do that? I've been sitting on this since the beginning of this conversation.
I'll let you deliver the punchline, Chris.
Well, yeah. So it's like this model. It's similar to the U-Haul model. They call it Ukraine. It would have been perfect. It was all about the timing, Matt. That's what it was about, timing.
And the addition of the U-Haul thing, I think, really does.
Yes, it would have been better.
Yes.
It would have been better.
It's what Shelley calls a punchline in search of a premise.
Oh yes, because.
Can we just get Anderson to cut this part out so I can deliver it and you guys can act surprised so at least the audience can enjoy?
No, I don't agree with that.
You were on the same wavelength with me earlier and it worked for good.
Yeah,
now it's for evil.
Yeah.
Evil, huh?
Yeah. So the U-Haul model called
seen
Ukraine. So good.
I haven't seen Chris that's fired up about something.
Yeah, because if I had kept my mouth shut and let you just deliver it, you know what would have happened? I would not have laughed because I had already thought of that.
Okay. I probably would have. I don't know. It's hard to say now.
It's actually, well, that would be impressive because it's very hard to get you to laugh at anyone's jokes.
Yes, I know.
You have a very high standard for jokes.
Yeah, but I'm currently sleep deprived, so.
Okay.
Would have been great. The whole setup at the beginning, like, I was trying to think of some pun that makes it Ukraine, and then I did. It would have been perfect. It would have been perfect.
And this is why you watch China Unscripted.
Thank you for watching. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
I can't come up with another Ukraine pun this quick.
Send in your best Ukraine puns.
Send in your best. Comment below best Ukraine puns. Matt can't think of them all.